What is up, guys? With UFC 299 taking place this weekend, there's been a lot of discussion over the last few weeks, last couple of months, comparing the UFC 299 card to UFC 300. These are probably the best back-to-back pay-per-views in UFC history, and although the UFC has kind of billed UFC 300 as like the best card in UFC history, there's definitely been some debate about whether or not 299 is actually the better card. So in this video, I'm going to go through, break down both cards, talk about which one I prefer, and I want to hear your guys' opinions also. Do you prefer 299 or 300? But let's just dive right into it. And we got to start off with the main events here. UFC 299 has Sean O'Malley taking on Chito Vera. UFC 300 has Alex Pereira defending his title against Jamal Hill. And if I'm being totally honest, I don't really think either card is being carried by the main event. I think the UFC probably thought this O'Malley-Chito fight would be carrying this card, but I don't know if the fans have fully bought into this. I think with Merab looking so great against Henry, I think people would prefer to see Merab in this title fight. You could also throw a guy like Corey Sandhagen in there. I think the UFC was kind of banking on this being like the rivalry matchup. They think Sean O'Malley's this huge star. I don't know if it is delivered in the right way, but still I think a very exciting main event. I like the matchup. I like the rivalry between these two dudes. They're both fun fighters, and it does seem like they actually don't like each other. It's not some sort of like, crazy fabricated beef. I don't think, they're huge fans of each other. They get on each other's nerves, but I think it's a solid main event. For UFC 300, it seems like the overall consensus was that fans were pretty disappointed in this main event, but I don't think it comes down to this being a bad fight or like a bad main event for any random pay-per-view. I think it's just the fact that people thought it was going to be this crazy, huge, super fight to headline the best card ever with UFC 300, and it just didn't come through. I think part of the reason why there's been some disappointment has been at the fault of Dana White. He came out early on kind of making a lot of these promises that every fight was going to be amazing. They're going to have this awesome main event, and he didn't really follow through. I think if he didn't make those huge claims, people would be very happy. I also just don't think there were a ton of top options to headline this card. If it wasn't going to be Conor, you're kind of looking at Izzy, DDP. At least for me, I'd prefer that fight to be in Africa. I think the UFC needs to capitalize when they have those big fights that can take place in certain regions. And outside of that, right, you got the Muslim fighters who have Ramadan during this time period. So it just wasn't a great time slot to have a super stacked main event. I actually like the Pereira-Hill fight. I think it's a fun matchup, especially if Hill wants to stand and bang with Alex Pereira, which is what he's saying. Obviously, that could, change. But if you're going to give me a fight with Alex Pereira standing and striking, I'm going to be very excited about it. Now, if I had to choose between the main events, I do think I would lean Sean O'Malley, Chito Vera. Just big fan of both those fighters. I think it has the potential to be very fun, and so slight advantage to UFC 299 there with the main event. Now, pivoting over to the co-main for 299, we have Dustin Poirier taking on Benoit Saint-Denis. Now, the UFC 300 co-main, I believe, is officially Zhang Weili taking on Yan Xiaonan. I think most fans view Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje as like the true kind of, fans co-main event. So that's what I'm going to be comparing here. I just think it makes it easier to match up. And these are both just super exciting fights. I mean, these are probably four of maybe the top 10 most exciting fighters in the UFC. All four of these dudes, they go in there, they get in wars, all very strong strikers. They're very durable. So I think both these matchups are just fantastic. It's pretty much a draw in terms of my excitement for these. I guess maybe I'd have a slight lean towards Max Holloway taking on Justin Gaethje, but I mean, both just A+ S tier fights here in the co-main, so neither side really gets a huge edge. Now, looking at the next four fights, I believe UFC 300 is a 6-fight pay-per-view, so these are going to be the rest of the cards on the pay-per-view. For 299, just added on the featured prelim. So 299 has Kevin Holland taking on MVP. You have Gilbert Burns taking on Jack Della Maddalena, Petr Yan taking on Song Yadong, and then Curtis Blades taking on Jailton Almeida. UFC 300 has Wei Li taking on Yan Xiaonan, Charles Oliveira going up against Arman Tsarukyan, Calvin Kattar going up against Aljamain Sterling, and then Yuri Prohaska against Alexander Rakic. I think name and skill wise, in terms of the best fighters, I probably lean UFC 300. They have a championship fight in there with Wei Li and Yan Xiaonan. You have 3 former champions in Charles Oliveira, Aljamain Sterling moving up, and then Yuri Prochazka coming off the Alex Pereira loss. So I think in terms of top tier talent, I would give 300 the edge. But I do think if you're looking at it in terms of entertainment, I could definitely be talked into favoring 299. I think the Holland MVP fight could be very fun. The Burns JDM fight I think is really fun stylistically. The Piotr Jan Song Yadong fight, I also love that one. I think that one's going to be a stand-up war. And then I also think stylistically Blades Almeida is pretty interesting. I know some people probably aren't going to love the Wei Li Yan Xiaonan fight on the UFC 300, and I kind of agree in the sense that it doesn't seem like a UFC 300 fight. It probably, at least I think I would have preferred it to have been in China with both those women being from there. But I'm excited from the fight. I think it's going to be fun. I don't think it's going to be boring, so I think the fans are hating on that one a little bit too much. I think the Charles Oliveira Arben Sarukian fight is great, but I do think there are just some ways where even though these may be the better fighters overall, that the fights may not be quite as exciting on the UFC 300 main card. So very close so far, going pretty much through the main card with 299 and 300. Now shifting over to the prelims, I think this is where we're going to start to see some separation in the quality of these cards and the depth. So some of the top fights on the 299 prelims, I think these would be like the consensus top 3. Obviously not including the Almeida Blades fight. We have Mateusz Gamrot taking on RDA, Pedro Munoz against Kyler Phillips, and then Caitlin Chikagian against Macy Barber. For UFC 300, we have Davison Figueiredo taking on Cody Garbrandt, Diego Lopez taking on Sadiq Youssef, and then Kayla Harrison taking on Holly Holm. That's not the official bout order. Those were just kind of like the 3 that were my favorite on the pay-per-view, the prelims of UFC 300. And when we start to get into the prelims, I do prefer 300. I think the Figgy Garbrandt matchup is really fun, even though I don't love it for Cody. Always have to be excited about a Diego Lopez fight. I think Sadiq Youssef is also a pretty entertaining guy. And then I feel like the fans aren't huge on this Kayla Harrison, Holly Holm fight. I'm actually pretty hyped for it. I think it'll be very interesting to see if Kayla can actually get down to 135 and if she, truly looks like what we saw when she was at 145 and 155 in the PFL. I also think if you're hating on this fight, I guess the way to kind of look at it to frame it better in your mind would be that the title fight we saw at the 135-pound division was pretty rough between Mayra Buena Silva and Raquel Pennington. So you should be rooting for Kayla Harrison to look impressive, look dominant, to kind of bring some spark back into that bantamweight division. Plus, there's been, some rumblings of potentially Amanda Nunes coming back. I think Nunes-Harrison is the biggest fight you could make at 135 pounds. So that is something I'm pretty interested in there with UFC 300. And then looking at the remaining prelims, I think there's a clear separation here between 299 and 300. For 299, you have Michel Pereira taking on Mikhail Oleszejczuk, Felipe Lins taking on Ion Cutelaba, Despain taking on Parisian. Despain is that huge new heavyweight prospect. Or you could go with Vergara taking on Almabayev, just trying to pick the top ones to match up the same number of fights. And then for 300, you have Bobby Green, Jim Miller, Jessica Andrade taking on Marina Rodriguez, and Bo Nickel taking on Cody Brundage. I think all 3 of those 300 fights are better than the prelims they'd be getting matched up with. Jim Miller, great to see him on that card. The matchup with Bobby Green is very competitive. People are hating on this Marina Rodriguez, Jessica Andrade fight. I think it's going to be a stand-up fight for 15 minutes or shorter if one of them can find a finish. Both the women are very powerful. I didn't really get the hate behind that matchup. Maybe you don't think it fits on 300, but I think it'll be a fun fight. And then Bo Nickel, when you look back at some of the best cards ever, a common theme is that on the prelims, you had prospects that ended up being huge stars. I think one of the Conor cards that was huge, I want to say maybe 205, I could be wrong, but you had like Khabib on the prelims, you had some other future studs on there also, so this kind of seems like that matchup, right, where they want to get Bo Nickel in front of a huge audience. They think he's going to be big time over the next few years, and I think it will age very well having him here on UFC 300, so in my opinion, a clear advantage when it comes to the pay-per-view. Overall, looking at UFC 299 and 300, I think the main cards are very comparable. I think they're pretty similar. I think you probably just, picking your favorite one, but I do think it's very close. But like I said, I think 300 has the clear advantage when it comes to the prelims. I think people's expectations were just too high for 300. Like I said at the top, I do think that was kind of Dana White's fault. Maybe he thought it was going to be an even crazier card. But I mean, like, people are complaining about this, and we look at the prelims, like Bobby Green, Jim Miller, what's the opening fight? Figgy, Cody Garbrandt. Like, you could put that in one of the main 5 fights on a pay-per-view, and no one would bat an eye. I mean, Andrade, Marina Rodriguez, there have been fights like that that are the 5th fight on a pay-per-view, so that's going to be your early prelims. I do think 300 has to get the edge for me. But whether you do prefer UFC 299 or 300, I do want to know down below. But I think both should be amazing cards. And as fans, we are very lucky here getting these as back-to-back pay-per-views. So thank you all for stopping by. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, and I will see you in the next one.